welcome to the Ashcast, man. I'm so glad to have you. Okay, I need to start this off by explaining to people that when we met, which I met you in person at DreamHack, but like when I first got the chance to talk to you, I was fanboying out of my mind and trying very hard to play it cool because I went over to say hi to your now wife, and she was FaceTiming you, I guess, or she was just on a video call with you, and she was like, "Oh, like I'm this is my boyfriend TLO, or you might know him. He's Starcraft TLO." And I was like, "What? Like your boyfriend is TLO? Like how does this not come up in conversation at any point?" And I was so worried that I was nervous. I was genuinely nervous when she was like, "Yeah, you can say hi." Like I was like, holy, like I've watched so many of your matches. I am such a huge fan of what you've done competitively. So the fact that you're on here, man, I'm rambling. But I'm just excited because I'm a fan. So thank you.
Thank you. It's really appreciate the kind words, and it was a really fun part at the beginning of my relationship with my now wife that once in a while she introduced me through calls like that, because we were basically having a long distance relationship at the beginning. I was still in Germany. She's in Canada, where I'm now too, and she was working events as a referee or in other capacities for MLG. So it was obviously there were some people that might know StarCraft. So yeah, I think it helped me a little bit with her. You know, it's like, okay, you know, he seems to be a nice guy because people seem to be generally having a positive opinion about him. So in a way, you played a little bit of a wingman to, you know, me eventually getting married. So I appreciate that.
Hey, I'm happy to help, man. I'm happy to help one of my StarCraft idols. Yeah, it's just so crazy to me because like there, you know, it was so out of the blue, and I was so focused on Gears of War because, you know, that's what the event was. Like when I go to events, and I'm sure you can relate, like you're just kind of in the zone for the event, right? And then just to, like I hadn't played StarCraft in a long time. I hadn't watched StarCraft because everything had been focused on Gears. And then it's just like, oh yeah, by the way, here's my phone. I'm FaceTiming with my boyfriend who is a StarCraft legend. And I'm thinking of like all the days in college where like I'm up way too late watching you play in Korea, or just it's just crazy, man. But yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast and learn more about like everything you've accomplished, because you've had a pretty like illustrious career. Like you have done so many things. It is you're a champion. You're just like a veteran. You're an all-around great guy. Like there's not a lot of people who have the accolades and then also the awesome personality. I'm gonna sounding like I'm fanboying again, so I'm gonna stop.
No, it's all right. You know, just keep it going.
Yeah,
no,
I'm blowing up your ego.
That's all right. I'll try to keep it on a little similar. Yeah, I've been, I guess, you know, just to introduce myself to some people that might not be as familiar. I've been basically started my esport career very early in more of an amateur way. So I started competing in StarCraft when I was around 12 years old in 2002. So that's for me, it's always incredible to see like how esport developed from when I started to where it is now. Because when I was playing, I was dreaming going to local LAN events where, you know, you would have a dozen people, or maybe sometimes you had even 100 or 200 people, but it was really stripped down, just like rows of tables, PCs. But then when in 2002, for the first time in my life, I went to an event called Gamescom, which is back in the days was in my hometown Leipzig, but now it's in Cologne. And that was the first time I encountered like esport, where people would be at a convention center and like watching games on a big screen. And we had the qualifiers for, I think, Germany for WCG, the World Cyber Games, which, you know, aren't around anymore, but they are basically kind of like the Olympics of esports back in the days. And those are great fun. And ever since then, I basically stuck to StarCraft. So I have been with StarCraft for 19 years now, which is pretty ridiculous. And yeah, So I'm still here, and I was a pro player. I played StarCraft professionally. I did some casting. I coached and managed for Team Liquid. I was with Team Liquid for 10 years, and now recently I joined Shopify, and we launched Shopify Rebellion, the pro team of Shopify.
That's so awesome. We'll touch more on the Liquid and the Shopify Rebellion thing. So in preparation for this podcast, I was doing my research, and one of the things that I did not know was that you actually played a game called Supreme Commander. Is that right?
And that's correct. So it's probably less known than its intellectual predecessor, which is Total Annihilation.
Okay.
So both these games, TA and Subcom, are basically the most hardcore real-time strategy games you can imagine. If you look up videos of it, the biggest feature of the game, basically the game had two big features that no other RTS really has done the same way yet. First of all, everything was physics-based. So every single projectile that like a tank or an artillery or like a laser would shoot, it would actually be simulated. And if it would hit, for example, a hill, it would hit the hill. If a tank would move to the left or the right, it would actually miss the tank. So it's kind of almost like an FPS that's also an RTS for every single unit, which made it very difficult for the game to run back in the days. So unfortunately, it was a little bit of a lag fest. And then the second feature of it was that you could zoom out all the way. So in most real-time strategy games or MOBAs or whatever, you have a mini-map, right? But in Supreme Commander, most of the time, you basically played full screen as if everything is just a mini-map, and every single unit and building would just be represented by an icon rather than something graphical. So basically huge gigantic maps, you would have hundreds of units, and in the early game you had a lot of really cool micro because of that physics simulations, and then in the late game it was more about like grand strategy, running your economy, having like 50 buildings, cranking out units, and like hundreds and hundreds of units slowly posturing and fighting against each other. It's a really cool game. It still has actually a community that kept the game alive. It's called Forged Alliance Forever. Forged Alliance is the expansion pack of Subcom, and it's really cool because you basically have this community that was given permission to run their own private servers, and people are now running their they have full control over the game. They're modding the game. They're doing balance patches. It's only a couple thousand people online at a time, I think, but it's actually a growing community again at this point, which is really cool because the game was basically at its peak when it comes to retail in 2007, 2008. And now in 2021, you still have some people actually keeping the game alive. So a big shout out to that community.
Do you play still?
I've once in a year, I log into a game or two. I actually played a couple of weeks ago, and I was happy that I still managed to take a match off somebody. So that was good. And yeah, that Subcom. So I was 17 when I played it, and it had a really 2v2 was a big part of it, and I played it together with my brother. And that's actually where my name comes from, because I'm TLO, the little one, and I played with my brother, who's my older brother, TBO, the big one. And so it was this cute little brother thing. And that was probably the first time I went to an event where I took a plane. There was an event in Portugal that we played in, and my brother and I managed to take first place, and we won like these ridiculously overpowered computers for 2007. It was like both of us won a quad-core PC in 2007. A quad-core is not a thing like most people actually had. I think they were like at least like 4,000 euros value or something like that. And that was the first time that I actually won something like significant for my professional career. So that will always have like a really important part of my passion for esports dedicated to Supreme Commander.
That's so cool. I had no idea that you went to an event and like won. I mean, that means you're a multi-game champion, right? You're not just StarCraft.
I mean, technically, even very much in the sense, because it was a very strange event. It was actually a multi-game event. I think it was 8 countries or 16 countries that competed, and it was. I think we played like 5 different games, and it was this really random collection. It was Supreme Commander. We had Quake 4, Stalker, which I didn't even know had a multiplayer, Battlefield, and something else.
You had to play everything?
So the strange thing about it was every country would send, I think, 5 people, and they could make up whatever composition of players they wanted to send. So Germany sent 2 Supreme Commander players. Oh no, it was 6 players. So we sent 2 Supreme Commander players, my brother and I, 2 Quake 4 pros, and we I think had 2 Stalker players. We didn't have anybody that ever played Battlefield. So and Battlefield was 5v5. Quake was 4v4, and Stalker was, I think, 5v5 as well, and Supreme Commander 2v2. So it was this weird thing where some teams had like just 5 Battlefield players and that didn't know how to play these other games, and our team was kind of well-rounded. So my brother and I, we won the Supreme Commander 2v2 tournament, which got us a lot of points for Team Germany. But we also, my brother and I, also played Quake 4 together with 2 Quake 4 pros, which was, I think, Kilson, who is still active, and Crit, or something like that. I don't remember his name anymore. And we actually managed to make it to the finals. And we managed to beat like one team that was like a pretty decent professional team that had 4 players. Getting carried, of course, by the Quake 4 pros, but my brother and I actually did pretty decently, because we used to play Quake a lot back in the days when I was younger. Now, never professionally, but just for fun. And so we managed to gain a lot of points in that section as well. Completely got destroyed in Stalker and in Battlefield, but because of Quake and Supreme Commander, we had more points than any of the other countries, and managed to take the gold. It was very bizarre.
That's like a old, like the original esports Olympics then, before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so strange to have like countries sending different amounts of players for each game. Like you'd assume, okay, just send a full team for everything. So it was fun though. I really had a good time there.
That sounds like an event that would do well now, like a really interesting, like have like, I don't know, like Starcraft, League, Counter-Strike or Valorant, like kind of mix it up and do that would be a cool event.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because I've never played this game. I've never heard of this game, if I'm being honest. So it's a physics-based RTS. Do you think that made it easier for you to transition into StarCraft when you discovered StarCraft?
I don't think Supreme Commander had like a huge influence on transitioning into Starcraft 2. I played RTS my entire life. I started playing Warcraft 1, Orcs vs. Human, when I was 5. And then I played Warcraft 2, and I played Age of Empires, and I played Cossacks and Empires, and I played probably legitimately 30 or 40 different RTS throughout my life. And it started very early for me to be a competitive thing, because my family very early on had 2 PCs. And I remember us getting a network card or 2 network cards when I was around 6 or 7, when that was a thing not every PC had. And we started playing Warcraft 1 in LAN when I was like 7 or 8. And then we started playing Starcraft Brood War when I was 9 or something. And so I just played that against my brothers. And then when I was 12, we finally got a 56K dial-up modem. And then at that point, I was probably a little bit better than all my brothers and some friends that we had LAN parties. So I go on Battle.net and I think, okay, this is going to be so easy. I'm going to be so freaking good. I beat all my friends and my brothers, right? And then I think I probably lost the first 30 games, which I'm sure is a relatable experience for like this generation that knows the time before the internet. When you like are a big fish in a very, very small pond, and then you get, access to the big world where people actually know what they're doing in games. So I played Brood War probably like pretty intensely for like 3 or 4 years, between like being 12 to 15, 16. I competed for my first team. I think my first team in Brood War was called Riders of Apocalypse, and my ID was Funeral. But then later on I switched very quickly. I switched to Radio, which is an anagram of Dario. Extremely clever for a 12 or 13-year-old. And so then I competed in like different team leagues and stuff like this. But then basically, after I was done with Supreme Commander, Starcraft II was announced, and I kind of, with Starcraft 1, always felt like I kind of missed the timing window because our internet was like really bad when I was competing. I was too young to really go to professional LAN parties. Many of them in Germany were 18 plus because we had really strict laws about if Counter-Strike was happening at the LAN, which was an 18 plus game, I wouldn't be allowed to go there because I would be in the same venue. So I wasn't really able to compete on the level that I wanted to.
Was Starcraft not 18 plus?
No.
Really?
No, it was, I think it was 12. There was like some weird thing where for some short amount there was like 18 plus or 16 version, because I think the medic like dies very violently.
Yeah.
But I don't know which country it was, but somewhere they reduced the age restriction again to basically 12 or 13, depending what country.
Interesting, because I remember Starcraft. It was either like the original Starcraft or it was Brood War, where the game was rated M, and the reason I knew that was because as a young kid myself, I was only allowed to have like 3 rated M games.
Yeah.
And if I wanted a different one, I had to get rid of one of the old ones. It was like my mom's system for that. And I had Halo and I had Starcraft, and I don't remember what the other one was, but I knew I wasn't going to get rid of Starcraft because I loved that game too much.
So you're actually 100% right about that, because I have a small anecdote about that. My wife, Matea, she has, I think, a disc that is still rated M. And we met Mike Morhaime, the founder of Blizzard, at a BlizzCon, and she was telling him, and he like didn't actually believe that was our thing. And then we sent him a screenshot that we still have the disc. So that's true. But I think it was like a very, very short time period where it was rated M and then was rated down to PG-13 or whatever. And so then Starcraft II was announced, and I basically took this very seriously. I wanted to get into this game really badly, and knowing it would come out soon, or like soonish, I was playing a shit ton of Starcraft 1 again in preparation, knowing Starcraft 2 will be pretty similar mechanically. So I started playing, I was basically in my last year of high school, and I played way too much Starcraft 1 in order for me to still really be successful in high school, though I did pull it off in the end. And I started playing like 6-8 hours every single day, or like not every, whenever I was able to. Basically, I would play Starcraft 1 in preparation for Starcraft 2. And then Starcraft 2 came out, and it was mostly just my Starcraft experience, I think, that helped me transition into that.
Were you, so for me, my StarCraft experience was playing, I would go into like custom games against bots, like against the AI, and I would put in the cheat code Power Overwhelming. And then I would spam the cheat code for it, like money. I think it was just show me the money. And then I would and then like the other one that let me build and like research faster. And then
Operation Qual.
Yes. And then it was on the it was a 4 like person map. It was like it was basically like the 4 corners, but it was like close, and then there was like one big square in the middle, so like every base had like one little passageway in and out. And is
that Lost Temple?
No, it was more spacey themed. Bloodbath. Yes. Okay. Bloodbath. So I would play Bloodbath, I would put in those cheat codes, and I would play Terran, and I would build like a wall of like 3 bunkers aligning my entrance with ghosts, so they had the long range shotguns, and then I would wrap like maybe like 5 to 8 siege tanks on either side of that. So then I had like 10 to 16 siege tanks and like 16 ghosts all just defending my base. And then I would take off the cheat codes and I would watch them all try to flood into my base and not be able to get through. And I would just amuse myself for hours doing that until my enemies ran out of resources, and then I would go win the game. And that was before I had like access to the internet and playing StarCraft against other people. That was just, I just loved doing that for some reason.
Right.
And then I got into BattleNet, and I started it was kind of the same thing. I was like, oh, I'm so good, and then I didn't think about like, well, I abuse cheat codes every single time I play. And I remember when I first started getting the hang of it, I fell in love with those like no rush 15 lobbies, because it reminded me of that. Like, you had time to build up, and it was basically just how well you could manage an army and like what army you put together. And then I fell in love with Zerg, and I started playing, like, this was during Brood War. I started like playing Zerg, and loved just like being able to line up a bunch of oh gosh, what are the main buildings for the Zerg? Like the
hatcheries?
Yeah, like lining up a bunch of hatcheries and just like spamming hydralisks and getting like as many as I could together for the unit like max, and then sending them out, and then immediately going back and building as many as I could. It was so satisfying, and I'll always remember there was, and I'm so sad because I had the replay saved on a hard drive at one point. I was in it was a 2v2 no rush 15, which, did you ever play the no rush 15?
I actually didn't, but I know a lot of people did.
So it was a 2v2 no rush 15, and my teammate like did something like dumb early on and got eliminated. Like his base like nearly got wiped, really, and I couldn't save him. And I fought back for, I think, like a solid 45 minutes to an hour, like of real life time to win a 1v2. And I was so proud, and I felt so confident for the rest of forever. And then I always held on to that memory. And then Starcraft 2 came out, and I was like, I'm going into ranked. I'm going to be the best. And like you were saying earlier, I was repeatedly getting destroyed in ranked matches. I was like, can we just do no rush 15 rank? Like, I'd be really good at that if we do that.
Yeah, I know there might even be some lobbies like that around nowadays still, but yeah, definitely different story, ranked play. For me, RTS, really, video games in general, were always highly competitive. It's just, I have 3 older brothers.
Yeah.
And we played games since I can remember. Chess, we played Memory, we played Magic the Gathering later on. We always played board games, and then I started playing video games with them so early on. So for me, and a lot of that was one-on-one with my 4-year older brother TBO. And so for me, it was just always the obvious choice to just go straight for like the most hardcore version that is out there in the game, and preferably one-on-one.
That makes complete sense. Mine was like, I have 2 older stepbrothers, and we would play like, you know, we had a Nintendo 64, so it was like Mario Party and like old wrestling games and stuff like that. And I didn't really get a PC until I was probably like 12 or 13, when I could finally start like playing StarCraft and stuff like that. I loved Warcraft 2. I was so happy that you said that, because Warcraft 2, I used to go over to a friend's house because he had like Warcraft and Warcraft 2, and I would just obsess. I would even just watch him play because I loved that game so much. Yeah. I didn't like Warcraft 3 as much, I'll admit. The whole hero thing. Yeah,
I was not super into it, but then I kind of ended up playing intensely for a year. Because it was different. What's really cool about Warcraft 3 is 2v2 is actually, it's probably the best 2v2 RTS and team RTS that was ever made, and the best FFA RTS that was ever made. So it's really cool for those more casual game modes.
Why do you think that is?
I think just having the synergy between your different hero abilities and the auras, and there's a lot of interaction between the allied players that a lot of RTS doesn't have. And a lot of RTS is just, okay, I have my army, you have your army, we'll do fights together. But in Warcraft, I have like a spell that will save your hero, and then that feels really good. Like the same way people love games like Overwatch and MOBAs. Warcraft 3 was kind of almost like the first game that had these elements where you could do those things, where I'm the support player, you're like the carry, and doing those kind of things. And then for FFA, it was probably the first RTS where you had an incentive to actually fight because your heroes would level. So really fun team games for Warcraft. But yeah, it's never been my favorite RTS either. But it definitely, we owe Warcraft 3 a lot when it comes to what came out of it.
Oh, for sure. Because I know, like, League of Legends, which is my favorite game of all time, probably comes from Dota, which is like comes from a mod of Warcraft 3, where like you had your lanes and your heroes, and you didn't do the army, you didn't do the RTS stuff.
Yeah, technically, just to go back into the deeper history, Starcraft had a mod called Aeon of Strife, which was the original MOBA that inspired Dota 2. So
Really?
that technically goes back all the way to Starcraft. It was like way more stripped down because you couldn't do as much with the Starcraft editor, you couldn't do leveling in the same way and stuff like this. But technically, MOBA was born before Dota, but it's like almost nobody knows that.
Really? So how did that work with a Starcraft MOBA? Like what? Because it was a mod of the original Starcraft or Brood War, or
Yeah, it was a custom map basically, and
Okay.
you would have like the 3 different lanes, and you had a different concepts where like there would be these neutral minions that spawn, and you would do stuff to fight down. So
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It just makes me think of like how many strip Jessica Alba lobbies, or like or whatever celebrity at the time there were in the StarCraft custom games.
Yeah, the internet was a different place back then.
Yeah. That's too funny.
It was simultaneously more beautiful and so much more terrifying, especially as somebody who has a 11-year-old daughter now. It's like,
yeah,
because I started going on the internet when I was around 12, pretty unchecked, and most people turn out okay, and there was this sense of freedom that existed, but it was definitely also not a place that children should have been on.
Yeah.
But we kind of, most of us turned out okay.
you kind of jump into the deep end and learn how to swim as you go. Yeah, I mean, like my parents, they did a good job of like regulating, like, when we first got like AOL and our dial-up internet, all I had was like the AOL children's access, which like it didn't give me an email. There, like it restricted. I could only go on like Nickelodeon and like AOL, like kid-friendly sites and stuff like that. And then that upgraded to like AOL Teen, and then I was allowed to go like play games on Pogo, which was like a flash game multiplayer. I used to play like billiards or pool every single night. Like that was my addiction. And then that turned into like, okay, like now you're old enough to have full internet, and Xbox Live became a thing and for me and stuff like that. But yeah, it was definitely a different world. So let me ask you, you played all these different RTSs. What about StarCraft was like, that's the one?
That's a good question. I think it's just somehow Blizzard just managed to create something magic that I think a lot of it was accidental, but one of the biggest thing I liked about StarCraft so much is that, first of all, you had 3 completely unique factions. Most RTS, if you think about Age of Empires, you have like 30 different nations or whatever, but more or less the same, right? You have slightly different stats. Somebody has better cavalry, somebody has better catapults, whatever.
Warcraft had 2.
Yeah. Warcraft 2, the factions were pretty close as well. You would have differences, but that would basically be an analog unit on both sides that would be the equivalent, right? Like you would have an archer on one side, you would have a spearman on another, and you would have like the double, an ogre on one side, which was the equivalent to a knight. That would be different spells, different abilities, different strength. But in StarCraft, you have 3 different factions that are basically completely different. Not a single unit has a direct equivalent on the other factions, and they would play so differently. Where you would have Zerg that has to expand like crazy. You have Protoss that somehow manages to stay alive against Zerg with like 1/3 of the supply, and then manages to get into the mid game and develop. And Terran that was and every matchup played so differently as well, that in a way that when you play StarCraft, even when you just played one of the 3 races, you basically play 3 games that are almost fundamentally completely different, especially in Brood War. Playing Zerg versus Zerg, or Zerg versus Protoss, Zerg versus Terran. You have to play so differently. And also, it was just impossible to ever play a perfect game. and there would be such a variety of meaningful choices and strategies, and no other RTS just had that level of meaningful decision making for players, mixed with this amazing ability to control units and get such completely different results out of them based on how you control your units. It could literally be factor 10, where in the hand of one player, one army could crush another army, but if it goes slightly different, or maybe if an amateur would use an army, it would just not work at all. And there was just something magical about StarCraft that Blizzard created. And then because of that, we had this, very early esport. Luckily in Korea, there's some historic factors that made it so successful in Korea. Mm-hmm. It was such a good game. And then in Korea as well, you had really strict laws that made shooter games completely illegal in Korea at the time. And I would say, like, in late 90s, I would say it was the golden age of RTS, but shooter games are definitely probably the other big pillar of multiplayer games.
Yeah.
And because shooters were forbidden in Korea, people basically could just play StarCraft and or play RTS, but StarCraft was the best one. So then it becomes super popular in Korea. You have literally TV stations broadcasting matches way before it should theoretically happen, way before, like, it makes sense when you look at it from nowadays lens, like, how could this have happened in like 2001 that people are watching esport on television, right? And that's still not happening in most countries nowadays. And so now combine that with early internet, we are so lucky that there was this community website, TL.net, that somehow people in the West got hold of what's going on in Korea. And that was another big attraction. Is like, wow, like, this game has a scene where people are professional players that are getting sponsored by like serious companies, and also they're playing on a level that nobody could even fathom at the time. And it was really, all of it was really arcane because there was no live streaming. Yeah. There was no way for us to even watch the games. There wasn't even replays at the beginning of StarCraft. So the way for us to learn about what people were doing in Korea was that people literally in Korea were filming televisions or like filming screens to then basically mail videos over to the West, and then people could write about it. And later on, people finally, replays became a thing. But at the beginning of StarCraft, it was just this magical thing where, like, we're trying to learn this game, all of us together, but it's really hard to get information. And it's something I miss a little bit, because nowadays games get figured out so quickly because you have Twitch, you have the best players, everybody is crowdsourcing the information. But back then, it was like, when a new strategy was developed by a player, nobody knew about that strategy but that player until they would compete at a tournament. And because there wasn't really many viewers yet either, it would be really slow until other people would learn that strategy, and they would have to reverse engineer it from information they would get from somebody. They would like literally be told, so he did this and this and that, and then they needed to sit down and try to figure out how to make the strategy work in a way that makes sense. So there was just a lot of pioneer spirit at the beginning of StarCraft that was really attractive.
Well, I think something that's always interested me watching competitive StarCraft was StarCraft is one of the very few games where timing is such. I mean, that is one of like the basic core things of professional StarCraft, is being able to know the timings of like when you need to build certain buildings, when you need to build certain units. I mean, no other game that I know of has that. League of Legends is up in the air depending on when you get you roughly when power spikes are going to happen, but it depends on how well they farmed and if there is fighting, and there's all these variables because it's a team game. Whereas StarCraft, like, if you had even, actions per minute, APMs, even like skilled players, if it was TLO versus TLO, they're going to hit at 2 minutes and 15 seconds, they're going to have this is what their base is going to look like, this is what their unit count is going to look like, because like you had to know that stuff. But it also allowed you to diversify your strategy, because he doesn't build an extra one of these, he's saving up the money to rush this building so that he can whatever. So I think that was something that was always so interesting to me.
Yeah, I think StarCraft does one thing really well, because the economy is both extremely deterministic. If the best players are playing, at 3 minutes they should have this many minerals, this much gas. But at the same time, there are so many different things you can do with that, and there's also different way you can theoretically like skip minerals, you can skip economy, go for something faster, tech or rush wise. So it's both deterministic and flexible, so that it's not completely random, but so how to explain this? So in StarCraft, you have two resources, right? You have minerals that you need everything for.
Mm-hmm.
Every unit, every building needs minerals, but then you have a secondary resource, gas, and gas mines at a pretty static rate, depending how many gas expansions a player has. And the beautiful thing about that is gas is required for tech and for more complex units. And because of this limiting secondary resource, you can infer a lot of information based on, in the early game especially, based on what kind of stuff you scout.
Mm-hmm.
So if I see my opponent has spent 400 gas on these things that I found with a scout, I know, okay, but at this point he should have already spent 800 gas. So then I can start thinking, where's that other 400 gas that is missing? Like, is that potentially a different tech branch that I'm not prepared for? Are there things hidden somewhere on the map that I should know about, but because I know this, I know also that? So StarCraft has that element of incomplete information that is very similar to poker. And a lot of StarCraft players actually very successfully transition into poker. And I think it's because it's a very similar skill set that you need to figure out. There's a lot of different things going on at the same time. So first of all, I know tendencies from a player based on how they have played in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in StarCraft is capable of really mastering every single style. So I can narrow things down a little bit the same way a poker player might know, okay, this person is known to be an aggressive player. I can adjust my playstyle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you do in StarCraft 100%. If I know they're aggressive and I know I'm a better player, I can play super defensively, super conservatively. I can play suboptimally to gain safety. And then, but then you also have strategies developing over time. So you can have this meta game where, okay, I know these are the 5 most popular strategies right now, so I can narrow it down with that. And then every map is a little bit different,
mm-hmm.
And then I can narrow it down with that. And the beautiful thing is that because of that, you have these mind games where, of course, you can narrow it down like this, and most of the time you're going to be successful. But if I'm known to be a defensive player, one of the best things I can do once in a while is to just throw that completely on the opposite and play a super aggressive series where every single map I'm just rushing my opponent. And it's really cool to see people making these adjustments in tournaments when you have a best of 5 series, especially between the best players, because then it's not just a game of StarCraft anymore. It's really this game between two minds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been very attractive to me about one-on-one games, because it's very clear who's doing what and why.
Yeah.
If you go deep enough, while in team games that gets really messy and complicated as a viewer, where in a League of Legends or a Dota game, it's very hard sometimes to know exactly why a team actually made that decision and why this happened, and there's a lot of chaos, right? Because some of I don't want to call it random. There's tons of skill involved, but it's more.
You have a lot more variables.
More variable. It's more difficult to quantify both mathematically, but also psychologically, I think.
That's so fascinating. I think and like the beauty of StarCraft to me too is like there's all of this layers of depth and strategy, and we've kind of touched on a little bit the different races. They all play differently, they all match up differently to each other, so you have to know those, you have to know your opponent, you have to know the map, you have to know the matchups, and then that's all just the macro. Then you have the micro of like how fast, like how well you can manage, you know, an army while also building your base, while also expanding your base into a new resource area, or even just like splitting your army. Like when I first learned about splitting, which I learned way too late into playing StarCraft to be able to implement it, but in the beauty of like, you know, just knowing like, okay, I like mid fight, like people get all panicked, like it's a fight, but like being able to split that army, do flanking maneuvers, like actually manipulating the army mid fight, and then also darting back to your base to start replenishing for reinforcements, and then back to the fight to resplit or to regroup or to chase or to not chase. Like it's just like watching people do that, it's so incredible. It's like watching a really amazing pianist, like who just knows what every single key is and where it is and knows how to put them together beautifully. Like that's what watching StarCraft at a professional level is to me. That's what watching you was to me. Like it's watching a professional pianist do like create art, but it's competitive. It's competitive art.
Yeah, people always like to make comparisons. What is StarCraft? Is it chess but in a video game? Is it boxing but or a video game? But I've kind of come to the conclusion that the best analog would be, imagine a boxing ring, but you have two people with a violin in it, and they need to knock the violin out of the other player's hand while playing a musical piece that is getting judged, and then also playing poker or chess in the middle as well. So I think it really is like this marriage of these different factors. And the beauty of that is you have some people that are the best violin player in the world, and then you have the player who's the best poker player in the world, or the person who's just really good at punching the other guy. and
AKA the Protoss, right?
yeah, maybe, but that could also be the poker player, really. So you have these different skill sets, and you can really shine. Of course, at the highest level, you need to be excellent at every single thing. But you have people that definitely excel at one thing more at the other, and you have different styles of players. And once you go down to, you know, maybe the B tier or the C tier players, like even on professional level, you suddenly have a guy who's just really good at one of those aspects and gets carried all the way through it. And then you have these really interesting meta games where other people know he's only good at that, but he's so good at that, even if I know that, it doesn't necessarily mean I can always beat him. And that's very interesting to me, that you can play this game in so many different ways, and it is such a sandbox. If you go back to Dota, for example, again, there's basically the amount of money that comes in on both sides is completely fixed by the amount of minions that just spawn every single half minute. How many jungle creeps? They spawn every single time after this many minutes. And then, of course, you have a lot of variance based on how the fights go and stuff like this. But most games, I think, are a little bit more similar, or like fall within a reasonable bell curve. And most StarCraft games do too. But then you have those 10% of games that just go completely off the rails.
Yeah.
And we still have games nowadays in tournaments of stuff we've never seen before, where 11 years after StarCraft 2 has been released, we just see this bizarre situation where after a 40-minute game, it comes down to like the last 300 minerals, where you have 4 units fighting against 3 units, and suddenly it's total craziness.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've seen it where at a professional level where like I don't remember what match it was, but there was like a Terran player who was just holding on for dear life and like sending buildings to fly off where they were out of reach so that he could try to build up a little bit more to fight back a little bit more. I like it's so crazy to me because like League, you know, there's a lot to know. There's definitely a lot of mechanics involved in micro, but and that's true for a lot of games like Coaching Gears. It's almost mostly micro. It's almost mostly your ability to play the game on a mechanical level and not the rest of it's not as much strategy. It's more one dimensional. But just like as somebody who can appreciate great mechanics, like I'll never forget the first time I think it was Marine King Prime, and I don't know what the map was, but I watched him take like a very small army of Marines, and just do like so much damage because of his ability to like, you know, like you're not just like clicking attack and then clicking away. Like he's like, he knows how long it takes the animation for like the shot to actually be released from their guns, and he's like doing it perfectly, like picture perfectly, and getting away, winning fights that he has no business winning. And it's just like watching things like that is so cool to me. Now,
and the kind of crazy thing is, just to add on that, is if we look at those replays now, and I've done that done that recently, is that Marine King Prime nowadays would probably be beaten by any Masters player that's not even Grandmasters in Starcraft II nowadays. The game has developed on such a level where the things we were cheering for like crazy 5-6 years ago are total fundamentals now, and it's amazing to me that the skill level develops like that. And I think a lot of esports are like that, where who knows how Dota, who knows how Gears, who knows how Counter-Strike is going to look like in 10-20 years. And also that is something we should be thinking about, because some of these games have been around 20 years now, so why shouldn't they be around for 20 more?
Yeah. And not only that, but like, as I feel like the esports demographic, you know, more and more kids are getting access to the internet earlier and younger, and phones, and being exposed to esports. And so the player base, I feel like, is getting younger.
Yeah.
And that means, you know, they're a little bit faster, and they're a little bit quicker, and they might learn a little bit faster. And so I think they're also going to bring different perspectives on these, you know, traditional strategies or metas or whatever. You're going to see the young, I mean, I'm sure that happens in StarCraft. You see the next generation of talent come in. I remember 2018, you and I were having discussions about Raynor, right?
Yeah.
And just like, you see that next generation of talent come in and do something slightly different, and it's like, oh crap, that's really good. And then everybody rushes to figure out how to do it better, or, you know what I mean? It's so cool. For you, you know, we've talked about like the different races. You're a Zerg main. So there's three, for people who don't know StarCraft, there's the Terran, which are like the humans. There's the Zerg, which are alien, but like bug alien along that line. And then there's the Protoss, which is like the developed, you know, futuristic alien society kind of thing, right? Like that's a pretty easy, if that's a fair description. So you chose Zerg. You chose you chose the bugs. What drew you to Zerg? So
StarCraft wise, I have a long history with all races. In Brood War, I played Protoss. You know, definitely when I was 12, like the Space Wizard Warrior race was like very attractive to me. So that was just based on that. And then in StarCraft II at the beginning, I played random. So I just played all three races, and I played a little bit of Terran. And then, so it was 2011, I was playing Terran. And it is actually an extremely specific reason. Back then, balance-wise, it was very difficult for Terran to scout. They didn't really have any reliable options. And it just pissed me off, basically, that a lot of games were lost more or less by a coin flip back then, where I couldn't have reliable information, and then I would just have to make a decision, and sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. And then Zerg can scout better than any of the other races, and they are the most reactive race. So rather than Protoss or Terran, which in most cases have a pretty predetermined game plan for the first couple minutes of the game, for Zerg, it's more about figuring out what is the plan of my opponent, and then I'm going to adjust my plan. It's just the way the mechanics of the race work, because everything for Terran and Protoss, you have different tech and production structures. For Zerg, it just all comes out of the same building. So if I see what my opponent does, I can very quickly adapt. And it's just kind of like this fantasy of like very fast evolution of like this bug Zerg swarmy race. And that was just very appealing to me, that no matter what, if I play perfectly, I can always try to find out what my opponent does and adjust, and then win the game basically in an honest way, rather than, you know, trying to manipulate odds in a way that favors me. And that is the main reason I switched to Zerg, really. Nowadays, the game is in a much better spot balance-wise, and every race is more adaptable, and every race has better scouting capabilities, but back then that was just not the truth, and switching to a different race comes with a lot of opportunity cost. They play so differently that it takes a long time to get to the same level of a different race if you're good.
Well, there was a period of time where Zerg was underpowered, right? Because I feel like I remember like a lot of discussion about how Zerg felt so weak compared like to either Terran or Protoss. Like you were just at a disadvantage from the beginning.
Well, every single race had like periods of dominance. At the very beginning of Starcraft, it was Terran. Then you had like the 2011 to 2013 was very Zerg dominant. Then you had a little bit of a Protoss era, but it comes and goes. Right now, we're probably in one of the most stable like 2 last years, where every race is pretty good. Nowadays, like 2 years ago, so Zerg was considered a little strong, but it's always hard to judge because sometimes you just have this one player who just beats everybody, and then it just skews the balance when it comes to competitive play.
Yeah,
that was Cyril at first, who became the first non-Korean world champion for Starcraft II, and now you have Raynor, who's like a second prodigy, and but you know it comes and goes, and sometimes one person figures out a new strategy, and that throws everything into whack again when it comes to balance.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I've actually used Zerg as an analogy a lot when coaching. I've talked about it both in like videos as well as like working with my team, where I look at FPS games and I try to take things that I learned from other games and other esports, and one of the things that I think Zerg's gameplay can translate over into other games is map control, right? Because Zerg is all about expanding out your creep because it makes your units faster. For those who don't play StarCraft, you have this like purple goo that you can like spread, and it comes from certain buildings, and then you have like queens, like units who can spread it to help like basically give you more control. And it doesn't give you vision, right? It gives you...
No, it does give you a little bit of vision too.
So it gives you vision, and then it also, when your units are on it, it makes them faster, right?
Yeah.
And you can only build your buildings on creep. But I talk about like the more map control you have in an FPS, it's like a Zerg spreading its creep. Like you want to be able to spread your map control out and control as much as possible. That way, if you do have to fall back, you're still falling back onto something you already know is yours. It's something you already know is safe. It's something you already have vision of or control of. And then I've also used the term just Zerging because as a race, I mean, you know this, but for people who don't play StarCraft, Zerg units are typically a little bit weaker health-wise, and the strategy is a lot of building up an army, sending them to their deaths, but hurting your opponent, and then building up a new army before they can, and repeating, right? Like just overwhelming them. And so like I've used that, like I'm pretty sure that it's used in StarCraft too, but like just Zerging your opponent, like overwhelming your opponent. It's something I've used in FPS and in Gears, and players have been like, what does that mean? Like, what is Zerging? Do you watch StarCraft? No, what's that? And I'm like, oh, okay, hold on. Let me give you a little bit of backstory about what Zerging is.
Yeah, I think the big lesson I've learned in StarCraft over the many years is that theoretically in StarCraft, the optimal play is always using your defender's advantage, because you basically, your opponent needs to come to you, you have more time to build up, you can position yourself perfectly, and theoretically that gives you an advantage. But you don't win games by only defending, because every single time your opponent attacks, you need to react to it. And that is the strength of it attacking, because if I'm attacking, I know what I'm doing. I imagine it's a bit similar in an FPS. If I'm running towards an objective, I am already aimed towards that area, right? So if I run into somebody, I'm going to have them in the crosshair. Well, if people are coming to me, I might not be looking directly.
Yeah, you have to look a couple different places.
Right, so that is the attacker's advantage, that I'm engaging and then the other person has to react, which comes with a delay in reflexes, comes with a delay in adjusting. Of course, if like 4 people are set up or looking down that one hallway, when you run down, everybody's gonna die that attacks. But attacking comes with the advantage of the unknown. You don't know where it's coming from necessarily, and that's why vision is once again so important. And the beauty is attacking gives you vision, right? Because if you run down a hall, I know nobody's coming, nobody's right behind me because I was just there. So there's definitely, I love that in general, like so many games there's lessons you can take from each other. I've definitely become a better Starcraft player playing some FPS. I've become a better Starcraft player playing some MOBAs, and I've become a better player playing a little bit of poker. So I think anybody should, if you spend 10 hours or 8 hours or whatever, 6 hours practicing your game, there always comes a point where one of those hours could be better spent doing a different activity that would make you a better player, more well-rounded player.
Interesting. I really like that. I like that. Like it's almost like going outside of your comfort zone a little bit, because it helps you learn more, give you a new perspective on something that, like when you bury your head so much into like one thing and you're only looking at that, then your perspective, your vision just kind of gets more narrowed and narrowed. But when you are able to step outside of that and do something else, play a different game, then you get that other perspective. I really like, I mean, that's a much better way of wording things that I've been saying for a while, of like, using StarCraft influences or League of Legends influences in my coaching for Gears and FPS stuff. But that's so awesome. And especially to hear it from a seasoned veteran, I think that's really cool. Do you think that contributed to your success?
I think being pretty well-rounded definitely helped. If I look at my career, I'm by no means the most successful Starcraft player that has ever lived. I never had my gigantic championship, but I had like a successful career for a long time, and I always try to learn from things outside of StarCraft. I think it's just the way our brains work. Our brains work best when we have different input. If you do the same thing over and over again, it becomes routine, and our brain kind of more or less doesn't function properly. So if I'm practicing the same strategy over and over again, I might become slightly better mechanically, but eventually I get tunnel vision and I'm not learning anything new anymore. There's boxers that take ballet lessons, and that's something like most people wouldn't expect, because it's, maybe the polar opposite of boxing, but they became better boxers because they took ballet and because they took away what they learned from there, because it's so different, and they learned something new about their bodies. Suddenly they can move a little bit better, maybe they are more balanced, stuff like that. And RTS is a little bit similar. It's much more cerebral, and anything that gives you a new perspective can theoretically be helpful.
I love that. Talk to me about when you joined Liquid. What year was it that you officially joined Team Liquid?
I think that was 2010 in April. And
is the wiki right in saying that you joined because there was a thread on TL.net of like TL join Liquid TL, make Liquid or pick up TLO, and then like it got so much support that they offered you a spot? Is that true?
That's not entirely true. So I hate to have to go back all the way again to the 2002, but actually the story of me joining Team Liquid starts when I was 12 years old, and I went to Gamescom in Leipzig once more. So I was a spectator at this event that I mentioned earlier, where WCG qualifiers were happening. At that event was a booth by a team called PG. Back then you could come get away with being a pro team that's literally just called pro gaming, because there wasn't very many professional teams yet, which they had some of the best players in a few different games. In FIFA they had good Starcraft players, and they had like basically exhibition matches where a pro would just play against a random person from the audience. And I was lucky enough to get picked for that. And I was like spending my entire day, 3 days at that booth. So eventually they picked the 12-year-old kid that probably looked more like he was 9 or 10, because I was a little bit over. And I play against a pro of theirs. His name was Cope PG. And the first game he plays only with mouse only, off race, so he doesn't play his main race. And I completely destroy him. The second game, so he plays, wants to have a rematch. Second game, he plays keyboard and mouse. still doesn't play his main race. I beat him again, and then the last game, he plays his main race, and I play a pretty cheeky, risky strategy. I played a Dark Templar trop against a Terran, pretty easy, but I beat him again, and all his teammates were watching, and they got me. The next day I came back, and there was one more exhibition match happening somewhere else, which was a station manned by Nazgul, Victor Husens, who's the founder of Team Liquid. So at the end of the event, they gave me a jersey of theirs. Everybody signed it, of their players, and at the back in German it said, "Even a little one can become a big one day," which isn't related to my ID, but I realized after I took TLO as an ID, then I found that shirt again. I was like, okay, this is almost like fate.
Yeah.
That is strange. And then I started playing Starcraft II in the beta, and I was just queuing up ranked game ladder, automated matchmaking, and I run into Nazgul on ladder because he was like trying to figure out Starcraft II. He figured, okay, if I want to invest into a team, I should know the game and find out who are the good players.
Yeah.
And he used to be a pro in Brood War, so he was pretty good at Starcraft II at the beginning too. So I tell him the story. This is a little weird, but do you remember this like little boy that got this jersey in 2002 from your team and that played against you? And he vaguely remembered, and we became practice partners, regularly practicing. He invited me to the Team Liquid Beta Invitational, which I knocked him out in the quarterfinals, made it to the finals, lost against Vydra, but second place. And then based on that, he invited me in to Team Liquid. So he made me an offer. I got a few offers at that time. Some of them had salaries attached to them, which were really low salaries. In 2010, it was like, I think the best I got was like $300 a month or something like that. But Victor made me an offer, no salary, but he told me, okay, one day, if you have sponsors as Team Liquid, one day I'm going to pay you. And because TLNet was just so legendary and important to me, I took his offer. And I also figured like there's more potential there. And turned out I was right.
That's awesome. So you were in early, like way early, before sponsors and everything. That's I don't think a lot of people today would make a decision like that for the lower or no salary, but more potential compared to the money in hand right now kind of thing.
Yeah, I was, trying to think long term. And even at that time, I consulted with my brothers and parents. A $300 contract that I think would have been locked in for a year. Sounds like a lot of money when you're like 19 for playing video games, but at the same time, I knew like Starcraft is big, and I felt it was gonna grow. So being locked in for like what is way less than a livable salary didn't feel right to me at that point. And I would actually give that advice to anybody if, unless you desperately need money, never get like a 1-year contract for pennies, because you always have to think about the opportunity cost. What if in half a year I'm worth more, or maybe I can actually get a better contract with somebody else. I'm sure there's still, I know eSport isn't the best when it comes to especially some of the less reputable orgs, and you have to be wise to that. And I was happy, I was glad that I was wise to that from the very beginning.
Well, I mean, you went with, they had TL.net, but the org, it sounds like it was more of a startup at the time, right?
Yeah, no money attached to it whatsoever, basically.
So it was literally just your love for TL.net that inspired you and your relationship with Victor?
Yeah, and I felt like Team Liquid will be a big deal. That's how it was, just a feeling I had.
That's awesome. And it paid off, clearly. You had so we were talking about this before we started recording. You were a little over 10 years, right, with them? Yeah. The second longest, you said?
Yeah, so the longest on Team Liquid, but historically, probably the second longest pro that has been signed to a single org as a player, at least like real like pro org. Unfortunately, there's another German, Hazoabs, who's an ex-Warcraft 3, but then also later Starcraft 2, and then HOTS player. He was with Mouse for over 11 years. So I just barely didn't like, I got this amazing opportunity for Shopify. Like, that would have been the one factor I said, like, can we wait a little bit longer until I get that record? But I didn't work out.
You negotiate that into your contract, like it starts after I get the record, and then we can. Well, who knows? Maybe with Shopify, of course. You're not really a pro player now, right? Like you're done competing, or do you compete for fun, or?
So I'm not fully done competing, but I'm not a full-time pro anymore. I still play Starcraft. I once in a while stream it, and I will try to qualify for premier events once in a while if I have the time. But yeah, it's not my job anymore. It's just something I do for fun. I'm running basically the esports arm of Shopify now, together with Jeremy Steves, who's my boss. I'm focused more on directly the athletics side. So we have a pro team. We are the Shopify Rebellion. We just launched basically a couple of weeks ago, right before AM Katowice. And yeah, I'm taking care of all players. I'm making sure, for me, it's really important that we have a pretty holistic approach. So I want my players to be healthy. I want to get them all the tools they can get to succeed. And at the same time, I'll also be involved in, creative direction, content. Right now, really, our team is extremely small. So everybody that's working on the Rebellion right now is kind of doing everything. But we are going to be scaling up in the near future. But right now, it's basically we are creating an org. So right now, it's very hard to define exactly what my job is, because it's everything. But further down the line, the focus is mostly leading basically the pros that we have on the team.
That's awesome. So just to backtrack a little bit, because I definitely want to talk about Shopify Rebellion. I have to ask, this might be difficult to answer. I'm sure that the decision to step down from Team Liquid was difficult. How difficult was it? Like, you were there for over 10 years. Team Liquid is a premier organization. Like, that couldn't have been easy.
It was definitely quite emotional. But at the same time, I've been with them so long that I was thinking already about I kind of want to do something new at some point in my life, you know? So I had that desire for quite some time. So it was a little bit bittersweet, because TL, the Starcraft team is like my family. A lot of people that I took this really long path with haven't been on the team anymore. So in a way, I already said goodbye to so many people over so many years. In Starcraft, I must have had over 20 teammates or something ridiculous like that over the 10 years, including the current roster. So in a way, I already did say my goodbyes to a lot of people, making it a little easier. But that was definitely, I'm not ashamed to say it, some tears flowing at the end when it was like becoming real. And they made like the really beautiful video of like everybody saying goodbye.
I cried during the video. Like I teared up. It's not even my video, it's for you. But I was watching that and I was like, damn, this is the end of like, I feel like I'm finishing a book. Like, you know what I mean? Like when you read a really good book and it's done and you're just like, you're sad that it's over. But then I also knew, I didn't know exactly what you were doing. I knew like you had something you were working on, because I think you told me like you were going to a job at Shopify. And which I thought was like, okay, cool. Like I know Shopify for like the web store platform kind of thing. I don't know what they're doing really with esports other than being a sponsor, but cool. I hope it works out for them. And then I saw the launch, like you said, a month or so ago. And, I was like, oh, that clever guy. Like, look, like he's actually created something really cool. So that now everything's making sense. Now I'm opening up the next book. I'm opening up the sequel and ready to read that one. So it was a cool experience, but like I'll admit, like I teared up as a fan. I teared up.
It was definitely very emotional, and it felt really strange because for so long I couldn't tell anybody what we are going to do yet. I wasn't announced with Shopify for quite some time. So it definitely for a while it felt like this vacuum that felt really awkward, even though I already started working. But I've always been doing this like in a public space, so I wanted to be sharing. Hey, we have this really cool esports stuff going on now at Shopify as well. But yeah, so definitely the end of an era. Truth is, I have an extremely good relationship with Victor still, with the players still. In a way, nothing has changed in the sense that I'm still talking to those people on a regular basis, and they always be a part of me. Will always be Team Liquid. Nobody's gonna be able to take that out of me fully. It's been such a long and really fundamental part of who I am. It's the first job I've ever had.
Yeah. And
the only job I ever had for 10 years. So that's pretty significant and kind of made me who I am, right? So
yeah,
that won't go away.
They're always going to be like family. Like, yeah. It's even, I mean, realistically, it's also in your name, TLO. You could be, instead of the little one, you could be like Team Liquid 1. But
yeah, some people actually thought that's
so let's talk about Shopify Rebellion, because I saw it came out of nowhere, right? Like, you guys just you did like the awesome marketing strategy of just like, boom, here we are kind of thing. And I was like, okay, Shopify Rebellion, I like the Rebellion thing. I like it's to me, like, what's going to capture me is like what I see visually. I'm like a visual learner, so let's see what this video's got. And it's, you guys worked, which company did you work with for that? Paper Crowns. Okay, so you worked with Paper Crowns, which they're phenomenal. And it was like the banner, like the black banner with the logo, and I was like, okay, like the black and the green, like that holds a special place in my heart, as I'm sure you know. And it felt powerful. Like, it didn't feel like another one, like just another esports org, like just another face in the crowd. It felt like you guys were like going, look, like we're starting off, but we're doing it right. We've got a really cool intro. We've got amazing branding. We've got a cool logo. Like, we're going to build something that you guys want to relate to. So when in that process did you get involved? Like, were you there from the beginning of like, what do we call it? Or did they say, hey, we want to start Shopify Rebellion, we want you involved?
Yeah, so basically I joined when it wasn't even fully clear yet you're going to have a team. So I've been there from day zero, basically, of our vision as Shopify for esports. There is a few things that happened before that. I don't know how much you followed some of that. So Toby Lutke, the founder of Shopify, is a huge Starcraft fan. Like, he has streamed on Twitch playing Starcraft, and Jeremy, he saw on Twitter that Select was looking for a job as a developer, and so he hit up Toby. And at the beginning of Shopify, a lot of people were actually, like, way back when the company was founded, people's StarCraft rank was like a determining factor whether they would get hired or not. Like, not like the only factor, but if people were, high masters or grandmasters, that was something that Toby saw as, an asset, because if you're good at StarCraft, you're probably good at other things too. So
that's cool. I like
that. So he basically offered an internship to Select pretty publicly on Twitter, and that made pretty big waves. Not just in the Starcraft scene, but it got a lot of press as well. There is like, holy shit, like, okay, somebody's getting internship because of their Starcraft ability. Interesting.
I remember that.
And then a little bit later, Homestar Cup was on, Homestar Cup 20. Mm-hmm. And Jeremy was watching again, and Toby was watching as well. And the prize pool was 25K, but it had like all these legends from across the world, like people flying from Korea, from America. So many people would come, and they just felt the economics didn't really make sense. Like, why are there so many awesome people, but the prize pool is relatively small? So they decided pretty impromptu to double the prize pool of Homestar Cup.
Wow!
Because they had a donation button, and again, that made quite an impact. And then from there on, things kind of developed where, okay, why is Shopify not an esport at all yet? It's such a interesting space. It's certainly more interesting to tell stories of people and support people rather than just slapping a logo on a billboard or doing like a regular ad. So from there, Toby and Jeremy and some other people at Shopify, they basically started thinking, we are doing zero in esport. We should probably be doing something, and now we're doing something. So
well, you're doing something pretty massive. I mean, like, you didn't just go like, let's do something. You went like, let's start something.
Yeah. So starting an org for us made a lot of sense. In a way, it's so what we want to avoid as Shopify is that we just are one more logo next to 20 logos, and you pay whatever amount that costs. Like, you're just another logo on an LCS broadcast. You're just another logo on a Dota broadcast, whatever. Right? That's, people don't really feel that, and Shopify is also a bit more, it's a different company because we're not trying to sell you an energy drink. We are not trying to sell you like a direct consumer product. We want to help people become financially independent and build their own business, and enable people to basically turn their passions into a livelihood and create something. We want to support creators. And the only way for us that really made sense was if we enter this space super directly, and one way to understand what people need is being an org ourselves, having player ourselves, because that way we understand what they're struggling with, and we can go super deep, and we want to be genuine about this. We want to add to the scene rather than just monetize it, which I'm super grateful, because it's like something that was taught to me day zero at Shopify, is that it's not a company that is thinking about profit first. It's a company that is happy to, experiment a little bit and rather create something worthwhile. And then from that, what is worthwhile, obviously, it's a good thing for the company that will eventually make financial sense as well. But you should first think about what's cool, what's awesome, what helps people, what's an interesting story, rather than how can we extract money from that directly. And that's an approach we're taking in esport as well, where our first agenda is not how can we get fans to fund our team. It's more like how can we make the beginning of Starcraft, the Starcraft scene, more awesome. How can we, the money that we spend is actually spent on making better products. So rather than paying for a logo, and the logo can definitely be part of it, how can I spend money to make the production of a tournament better? How is there like a tool that could be built by a developer that would make your broadcast cool? Because now we have live stats, which is something we did for TSL. We paid somebody in the community of Starcraft that is a modder, and we made a tool that an observer could bring up with a hotkey, and you would see like live battle reports, kind of like in Dota, like after a team fight, that now you can do in Starcraft II as well, which didn't exist before. So we kind of want to find opportunities like this where we can spend money to create value for the community. And then that's our approach, more than, hey, here's us, here are we, and buy our product.
Yeah, I really like that, because it's an org that's not starting from a standpoint of like, oh, we want to make like, this crazy ROI and we're getting into franchise leagues or into the, the big titles, the tier 1 esports. I mean, Starcraft, I love Starcraft, but I don't think it's in that same category as like League, for example. Yeah. So it's really cool to see an org that's starting up with like the right support for the team, and it's a passion project from the top down, right? Like, you love Starcraft, your bosses love Starcraft, obviously your players love Starcraft. Like, it's everybody involved is passionate about what you guys are involved in, which is like really cool to see, and not a lot of brands do that. And I think that's something that you have to be passionate about what you're doing to really get the best product. And then
and the funny thing is, it's not just passion project, almost like, I don't want to mean you imply that, but almost implies that it isn't guided by logic. But the cool thing is that logic and passion totally come together here, because one of the reasons why most companies, they just decide to spend a couple $1 million on like an easy ad, logo, here's our video that you put in, is because those companies don't have people, or few people, that actually really understand those things. So it takes a lot of micromanaging and a lot of effort to create something where you engage more genuinely, but it's probably also more financially efficient, actually, if you do that, because then you're actually reaching people. It's really easy to have like a really big budget marketing campaign and then look at how many people watched your ad, how many people saw your tweet, but a lot of times those stats don't really mean anything, because if it's like, if you run an ad during a broadcast and there's something just totally not engaging, what is actually, how many people will actually be interested in your product after that? A very small amount. And I think if you approach it more intimately, it probably also makes more sense as a company from that standpoint. So that's something that I'm really grateful for. That just, it makes sense from so many different levels.
Yeah, I didn't mean to infer that you guys are like just throwing money at it. I more meant that, like, I think you see the best out of players, and I've always believed this, when they truly love what they do. And I think that's true for anybody. Like, when you truly love what you do, you put in your best efforts, you perform better, you break your own expectations and meet higher ones. And I think that's something, like, a lot of orgs start with this mindset of so sales focused that the passion gets lost. And I think you guys are the contrast of that, where you guys are showing the passion for your game, the passion for what you guys do, but like you said, also being calculated about it. There's still a strategic approach to it. It's not just throwing money into a fire, but the passion is sparking that. So you guys are doing it, in my opinion, a really constructive and the right way. I think...
and it definitely comes from a bit of a place of privilege, because I understand so many orgs in esports, they're not profitable, right? So many of them are struggling financially, so they have to think so much about how can we monetize, how can we sell more merch, how can we sell more sponsorship. So it's like an unfortunate truth, right? That money is a factor, and many esports orgs that people think are doing amazingly financially, they are actually not doing as well as the public would potentially think. And we are backed by a huge company that we can make these decisions and think really long term, and that's a huge advantage, right? Because I don't have to worry about, if I don't get the sponsorship renewed in 2022, like, we're done. So I need to figure out, I need to figure something out. We know, we're fine. And that gives us the luxury to think what we're doing now is going to be building the foundation of what we want, where we want to be in 5 years. And that can allow us to make decisions that other orgs simply can't make because of financial realities.
Well, I mean, that especially in the world that we're in now, because we're in such a different esports world with with COVID being a thing, and we don't know what that new normal is going to be. We don't really know when events are going to return. So like, esports has the luxury of being able to be online still kind of locally. I don't think Korean Starcraft players can play against North American Starcraft players, for example, but we still are able to hold tournaments online, which is a blessing for us. But that's affected a lot of businesses, because then, like you said, the sponsor dollars, like, they don't have as much because they're not selling as much, because people, it's just caused a crisis all over the world. So I think for you guys are going to be able to be building something really cool, something that you're passionate about, something that's catered towards your community and really giving back to your community, and not have that, like you said, the same worry. I'm excited to see what the Rebellion turns into, because it sounds like Shopify Rebellion is here to take over.
Well, we don't want to take over. We want to add. We just, of course, we want to be the best. But what's really important to us is we'll definitely be working with other people. We want to, whatever space we enter, we don't want to crush our competition. We want to maybe we want to be a healthy competition where hopefully at the end everybody benefits from it. I think, especially the esport, it makes no sense to be zero sum. We don't want to invade somebody else's space and take away from them. Mm-hmm. Hopefully our goal is like when we enter, everybody is better off in some way. But that doesn't mean in competition, yes, we want to crush people.
So speaking of crushing people in competition, you signed an all-star roster, right? And I haven't watched Starcraft, at least not as in-depth, for a couple years, but I am very familiar with Bjorn. I am very familiar with Scarlet. And then you also brought on Lambo. So tell me about the decision to sign these three players specifically.
So the first factor on that is that's a nice segue from what I just said. Bjorn was without contract. He pretty recently just came back from military service. South Korea has 2-year mandatory military service, which a lot of times is the end for professional players, but Bjorn came back. Mm-hmm. and very quickly turned out to be one of the best players again. And we started talking to him pretty early. I think it was, I don't know when I had my first conversations with him. It must have been in September last year or something like that. And then he won a pretty sizable event shortly after that. And then everybody wanted to sign him, but luckily I was already talking to him. So we got him. And Lambo, the same story. He didn't have a team, but very good player, really loved by the community, creates a lot of content, extremely well-rounded, kind of like the player that I think every org would be happy to have, because he's the kind of like Swiss Army knife that does really well at tournaments, but also can do cool content and stuff like that. And didn't have a team, so again, awesome. We can hire him, and we don't need to take him away from anybody, because that doesn't StarCraft, there's not that many reputable orgs at the moment, so that was a priority of me. I didn't want to like poach a player from a team that is doing good by their players. Nobody would gain from that. And then Scarlet was in a similar situation. She was actually signed at the time with a Chinese team, and she used to compete in a Chinese team league, and she was based in Korea before the pandemic, but then needed to go back to North America, and it didn't make sense for her to be on the team anymore, because that team league, she wouldn't be able to play in that anymore. So they let her go, and then it made sense for us to also get her. And also Shopify is a Canadian company. She's Canadian, so it's kind of cool to get like a home, or like I shouldn't say Canadian company, international company, but founded in Canada. So it was kind of cool to have that connection. And and then we have a European, we have a North American, we have an Asian player. So I kind of love that as well. We've as I said, Shopify is super international, so having a super international roster for our first 3 players, that was not really a factor for me to pick the players, because it was more about their personalities and so on. But it was kind of nice that it came together like that.
Yeah, I mean, we can pretend that you had that planned all along, but no, I think it's really cool. I mean, so the branding came out, and then right after you guys announced your roster, right? So I remember seeing the roster announcement and being like, okay, like this is actually like a really big way to make waves. Like you're hitting the ground running. Like it's not just like, hey, look, we've started an org, tune in, and eventually we're going to announce our team or our first game. It's like, here's our org. By the way, here's this all-star lineup of players. I mean, like I was a fan of, this is going to sound like I planned this, or like I'm not or that I'm not telling the truth, but I actually was like a big fan of Bjorn before his military leave. So cool. I was very familiar with him. I loved watching his style of play. And I just felt like I felt like, you know, I got disconnected from the scene, and I remember vaguely like commentators talking about like it could be near the end, because like I think there was like the rumors of him having to go do that soon, and like stepping away and retiring or something like that. But seeing him come, like, well, I didn't know he's coming back, but seeing him come back, or knowing that he's coming back, and for your team, and just like, now I've got TLO, I've got Bjorn. I loved watching Scarlet play, because she was one of the like the main people to put women on the map in competitive StarCraft and show like, look, like they can be badasses too.
Yeah.
So like, and I admittedly don't know as much as I should about Lambo, but I mean, based on you, Scarlet and Bjorn, I'm sure there's no reason why I wouldn't become a massive fan of Lambos too. So I'm excited, man. How's the team been doing so far?
It's pretty good. We're like, you know, that it's I wish we would be able to be in one space together, because there's something magical that happens when people are in one space. So but like everybody's practicing together. We're like, result wise, Bjorn did really well at I am Katowice, not quite you know, finals or anything like that, but he did pretty decently. And then we had like a few performances so far from Bjorn that were pretty amazing. Lambo and Scarlet are still like finding their footing, but we believe in a player like, for us, is like really long term, and we literally just announced, and now basically it's my job. How can we unlock the potential of everybody to be there, being the absolute best? And I'm really excited for this season. So the Starcraft II circuit for 2021 to 20. So basically, our season is kind of like March, as March, April to February, beginning of March next year. So it hasn't really kicked off yet. I think we're gonna have like our first big qualifiers end of April, and then some smaller events. Yeah, so I'm excited for like the next month or two to get everybody super ready. And Bjorn is playing next week in Code A in GSL, so we're doing a lot of preparation for that. And nice. Yeah, I'm just super stoked right now. There's so much to do still. For example, we actually don't have a team uniform yet that we're like right now designing and producing this. It's been pretty crazy even hitting that announcement. So our goal was to announce before I am Katowice, because Scarlet and Bjorn were competing at the World Championships. And to pull the curtain back a little bit, the graphic, basically the animation of the flag that looked awesome and stuff, it didn't finish rendering until a couple hours before our announcement, and Papergrounds actually ran into like a rendering error on their end, but luckily it's still everything finished in time. So we were, you know, I think you were saying we're like hitting the ground running. We definitely we definitely were hitting the ground running. Everything, you know, we are building this org now, but in like some way, I feel like we shouldn't have announced yet. But Shopify, we kind of love doing things this way, where things aren't quite ready yet, but you announce already, and then you just build it from there. And yeah. I think it's just a very honest approach. So I'm excited for what we can pull off over the next couple of months to like really wrap this org up and have every piece that we need in place.
I love that. Are there any exciting plans to expand, or are you staying focused on StarCraft right now?
So we are definitely having a super open mind about everything right now. We are already involved in Path of Exile. Okay. So we were sponsoring some races, some gauntlets there in conjunction with Silsarin. And we sponsored, right, like a couple months ago, we did a very, very small diabolical event. But for me, the first year of us is going to be a lot of scouting. To think about it in a StarCraft sense is finding out what are the spaces we want to be involved in, focus in StarCraft right now, get it right. Because I think a lot of orgs in esport make the mistake of expanding so much in every direction that it just becomes this indistinguishable soup where some, if you have 10 different rosters, it sometimes feels like some of them don't get serviced in the way they should be. And for us, it's important that every single thing we do is quality and actually gets the attention that it deserves. So I wouldn't want to spend the first year and suddenly we picked up, 5 teams from like 5 different games. That doesn't make sense to me. So we'll take it. I don't want to say slow, because actually things are probably going to happen relatively fast, but it has to make sense and we have to understand it.
Yeah, calculated.
Yeah.
I love that you're tying, after all the conversation we had earlier, you're tying StarCraft gameplay back into the business strategy of Shopify Rebellion, and you're scouting, and then you're solidifying your base, and then you might look to expand a little bit, spread the creep a little bit.
Yeah, you want to overextend yourself.
Yeah, you don't want to overextend. That's awesome, man. I'm really excited for you. I'm excited to watch what Shopify Rebellion becomes. I was confident knowing you that the right approach would be taken, but hearing like more into the thought process and how you guys are approaching esports as a whole, I'm really excited. I think that there's not enough brands, and there's not enough people like you in the industry, but not enough brands doing what you guys are doing. So I'm really excited, and like I said, I've opened up chapter 2, or I've opened up the sequel of this TLO book, so I'm excited to see TLO, the Shopify Rebellion stories unfold.
I look forward to it too. It's we don't know ourselves fully yet where it's going to take us, so it's going to be an interesting read for ourselves.
Well, I'm sure only good things. We have been talking for about an hour and a half, and I know I've taken a lot of your time, so I want to wrap this up, and thank you again for coming on and being a guest. It's been amazing to hear these stories. I mean, I feel like you have so many stories that I'm gonna have to have you back on another time, and we're just gonna have to hear story after story of like old events that you went to, or tournaments, maybe interactions with Idra, because I'm sure there's probably some fun stories around him.
He's actually a really nice guy.
Was it a persona? I have to ask.
I wouldn't fully call it a persona. Like, I think it was genuine in the sense that when he played, he just got extremely angry in game. And maybe he played it up a little bit later on. Maybe EG kind of encouraged it a little bit for theatrics. But most of it was genuine. But outside of the game, when you meet him as a person and don't play StarCraft against him, he was always nothing but lovely.
Well, that's good to hear. I was always a big fan. I loved like there was a video of like the stone face where he walked out and there was crowd on both sides trying to get high fives, and he just walked past all of them staring at the stage. But yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said, you are a legend and an esports hero. So having you on the podcast means the world to me. I'm excited for you and Shopify Rebellion. Is there anything else you want to say? Any closing thoughts or shout outs?
Just thank you so much for having me. It's been really good talking to you. And yeah, hit me up anytime. And anybody that wants to follow, the story unfold of Shopify Rebellion, definitely give us a follow on Twitter. On Twitter, we are the Shopify Rebels, because Shopify Rebellion was too long. But yeah, so we are Shopify Rebels. Give us a follow, and hopefully we'll have many awesome stories to tell.
Perfect. I'll make sure everything's down in the description of the video too. Thank you so much, Dario. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. Hopefully we'll see you all back for the next episode. Thank you so much. Have a good one.